And welcome, history buffs! My name is Nick Hodges, and I've decided to cave into public pressure and review 300. Now, don't get me wrong, this is a great movie. The reason why I didn't want to review it originally is because this is a show dedicated to informing you guys how accurate a historical film is to its source material. But in this case, 300 is trying to be faithful to the graphic novel by Frank Miller, and not so much the actual Battle of Thermopylae. I didn't think it'd be fair of me, to be honest, to have a go at this movie and say stuff like, well, Xerxes was not a giant, the Persians never used rhinos and elephants in Thermopylae, and they certainly didn't have whatever the hell that's supposed to be. So instead I'm just going to go over the actual battle and discuss the lives and the culture of the legendary warrior society, the Spartans.
This is
300! This may come as a surprise to some of you, but I don't like the Spartans. I'm not saying they weren't great warriors, in fact they were absolutely the greatest warriors in ancient Greece, but theirs was a cruel society, fascinating, but unimaginably cruel. Every waking moment of their lives was dedicated to the state and perfecting the art of war, and that's pretty much about it. When a Spartan was born, the first thing to happen was that an elder would take the newborn and examine it for defects, abnormalities, any signs of weakness. If there was even a slight hint that this baby wouldn't be perfect, then that child would be exposed to the elements and left to die on a sacred hillside. And then at the age of 7, a Spartan boy was taken away from his family to be placed in a military training program called the Agoge, and it was brutal. For the next 12 years of their lives, these poor kids would be stripped of their humanity in order for them to be molded to become perfect warriors. They were forbidden to cry and taught how to conceal terrible pain. One such exercise was that these boys would be flogged in groups until they passed out. The last one left standing would be honored since he was the toughest. They were also inadequately fed, cast out into the wilderness during the winter months without warm clothing, and their final initiation was to sneak out of their barracks at night and murder a helot, which was a Spartan slave. The only thing was that you were not allowed to get caught doing it, because if you were, then you were severely punished, since it was supposed to teach you how to evade capture. And loads of kids died during the Agoge, and that's exactly what it was supposed to do, to weed out the weak and only produce the strongest warriors worthy of Sparta. But it doesn't stop there. Every form of child abuse you can possibly imagine was inflicted on these poor kids. In fact, there's one scene in the movie that inadvertently points it out when Leonidas starts slagging off the Athenians to a Persian messenger.
the Athenians have already turned you down. And if those philosophers and boy lovers have found that kind of nerve...
Really? You're gonna have a go at them for being boy lovers? Don't you think that's a bit rich coming from you guys? I mean, after all, many historians agree that it was quite common when Spartan men trained Spartan boys, they did a little bit more than just bang their shields. In fact, you can now watch 300 and know that Leonidas and all his men were buggered children and buggered children. But hey, you know what? As long as it produces perfect soldiers, am I right?
Find trust.
Exactly. Now, aside from physical training, Spartans were also taught music, mathematics, and philosophy, and as a result, they became famous for being very quick-witted. In a way, you could see Spartan wit to be the original inspiration behind 1980s action movie one-liners.
Don't disturb my friend, he's dead tired.
I kid you not, Spartan history is just filled with golden gems like that. I do have to give them credit with one thing, they really did have the best comebacks.
1,000 nations of the Persian Empire descend upon you. Our arrows will blot out the sun.
Then we will fight in the shade.
Spartans! Lay down your weapons! Persians! Come and get them!
But I'll tell you the story about when the Peloponnesian War took place and the Athenians were at war with the... They sent a messenger to Sparta and they said, if we beat you, we will not spare your children, we will destroy your civilization, we will kill everybody, we will spare no one. And the Spartans sent back one word reply, if.
So that takes care of Spartan men, but what about Spartan women? Well, if they survived being exposed as babies, then they would be raised to be mothers in order to produce warriors, and because of this, it was considered important that they be physically fit in order to bear children, so they were trained in gymnastics, dancing, wrestling, and other forms of athletics. As a result, Spartan women were famous for being drop-dead gorgeous. Homer described Sparta as Kalaganeka, the land of beautiful women. In fact, the legendary Helen of Troy, the most beautiful woman in the known world, was also from Sparta. Now, unlike other women from ancient Greece, Spartan women were not repressed and received a formal education. Their higher intelligence and near equal status to men gave them no lack in confidence either.
Do not be coy or stupid, Persian. You can afford neither in Sparta.
What makes this woman think she can speak among men?
Because only Spartan women give birth to real men.
They were also not ones to screw around with. Just like the men, they were also trained to fight, since they would be the last line of defense in Sparta if the main army was ever destroyed.
Consider the fate of your women.
Clearly, you don't know our women. I might as well have marched them up here, judging by what I've seen.
Now, you might be wondering, if all Spartan men did was work out and train for combat, and all Spartan women did was work out and produce babies, then who the hell did everything else? Like bringing food to the table and building houses and stuff like that. Well, Spartan society was divided by 3 different social groups. At the very top were the 10,000 Spartan men known as the Homoioi, and they were the elite class that ran Spartan civilization. The second group were the 60,000 non-Spartan citizens known as the Perioikoi. They were essentially a middle class that couldn't vote and earned Spartan military protection by providing them with weapons, armor, and other necessities. At the very bottom were the 100,000 Spartan slave class called the Helots. They worked primarily in agriculture to feed the Spartan war machine, had very little rights, and were treated appallingly by the Spartans. All of this combined together allowed the Spartans to focus on nothing else but to prepare for war.
Spartans! What is your profession?
By 480 BC, the Persian Empire was the largest to have ever existed in the ancient world. Its territories included Egypt, all of the Middle East, to parts of Pakistan and India. When the Persian king Xerxes decided to invade Greece, he assumed there would be an easy victory. I mean, after all, Greece was just a blip on the map and had a population of 600,000 at the most, whilst the Persian Empire had populations of millions and millions with never-ending resources and wealth. And with this amount of power, Xerxes thought he could subjugate Greece.
If you value your lives over your complete annihilation, listen carefully, Leonidas. Xerxes conquers and controls everything he rests his eyes upon. He leads an army so massive, it shakes the ground with its march. So vast, it drinks the rivers dry.
By the way, guys, he is not exaggerating. By modern estimates, Xerxes commanded an army of 300,000 men. Now, although this figure is much smaller than the figure of 2.5 million, as the Greek historian Herodotus claimed, it's still massive, especially if you factor in the population density of ancient times. If you look at it from the Greeks' point of view, it really did look like the whole world was ready to swallow Greece whole. So Xerxes pretty much had everything a king could ask for in a conquest. He had enormous wealth, overwhelming numbers, and the will to see it all through. The only thing he lacked was foresight, and all these other advantages rendered him to be slightly overconfident.
What does your spy report?
To be honest, Your Grace, it's hard to believe. He says they're a bunch of puffters.
Explain.
Well, he says he saw the Spartans comb their hair and anoint their bodies with perfumes and scented oils. All of this whilst naked.
That's gay.
Yes, Your Grace, very gay. Very gay indeed, Your Grace. No doubt their gayness will prove a decisive factor in winning this battle.
Excellent. Let's not look into this any further. Attack!
Well, if Xerxes actually bothered to do his research, then he would know that the Spartans were actually preparing their bodies for death, and would fight like dogs to the bitter end. Although he was later told this by his advisors, his initial reaction to the Spartans as fruitcakes really does give us an insight into his genius military strategy. And what I mean by this is that this isn't the first time that the mighty Persian Empire has fought the Greeks. In 499 BC, the previously conquered Greek colonies of Ionia revolted against Persian rule. Before they were eventually crushed by the Persians, the rebels received military support from Athens and burned the Ionian capital of Sardis. This of course angered the Persians and they swore vengeance against Athens. In 490 BC, Xerxes' father King Darius sent an army of 30,000 men across the sea to destroy Athens. On the Greek shoreline, the Persians meet an army of 10,000 Athenians, and although they outnumber them 3-1, the Persians get the crap kicked out of them and were slaughtered. This was to be known as the Battle of Marathon. So when the first Persian invasion of Greece failed, King Darius made plans for a second one but died before seeing it through. So it was now up to his son Xerxes to pick up his father's mantle, and that's exactly what he did. So Xerxes planned this for 10 years. In 10 years, he never bothers doing any real research on this enemy he's supposed to conquer. This idiot solution in defeating the Greeks was, well, they kicked our ass in Marathon even though we outnumbered them, so maybe the solution is to throw even more soldiers at them. To continue underestimating them, never asking the question of how exactly the Greeks defeated them the first time, and ignore a very important rule in warfare, that numbers alone doesn't guarantee victory, especially against a technologically superior enemy. A perfect example of this would be the Battle of Atumba in 1520, when less than 1,000 conquistadors were able to destroy an army of 40,000 Aztecs that helped lead to the downfall of the mighty Aztec Empire. So, what do I mean by the Greeks being technologically superior to the Persians? Well, let's look at their weaponry. Obviously, I don't need to tell you that the Greeks didn't go into battle half naked like in the movie. This is clearly all from the graphic novel. In real life, Spartans were heavy infantry and wore armor made of bronze. They also carried shields made of strong wood with a thin sheet of bronze, and when the Persians fired their arrows, they would literally just bounce off the Spartans' shields and armor because they were made out of cheap date palm wood. In contrast, the Persians wore little to no armor, and their shields were made out of a much thinner wood, and some of them were even made out of bloody wicker, which Spartan weapons had no problems whatsoever in penetrating. So what's really infuriating to me is that the Persians know this! They fought the Greeks at Marathon and sustained heavy losses because of their inadequate weaponry. You'd think someone, somewhere, would have said something in 10 years about their weapons needing an upgrade. But anyway, the question still remains, how did an army of just 300 Spartans and 7,000 other Greeks hold off an army numbering nearly 500,000 for 3 days? Well, another advantage the Greeks had was the strategic value of the landscape they chose to fight in, and Thermopylae was perfect for that because it was a narrow coastal passage with the Aegean Sea on one side and a high vertical cliff on the other. Its natural bends and curves created perfect choking points where Xerxes' massive numbers were just taken out of the equation. No matter how many soldiers he funneled into the pass, the better equipped and better trained Spartans were able to hold their ground and inflict heavy casualties. This continued for 2 days before the Spartans were finally defeated on the third. Out of all the movies I've reviewed so far, 300 is, without a doubt, the wackiest and craziest of them all. It manages to be historically authentic and completely bonkers at the same time. I mean, let's just be honest here, you cannot take a movie too seriously when it tries to entice an antagonist with a quadriplegic hermaphrodite. I mean, I think even Ephialtes has standards.
Everything you could ever desire. Every happiness you can imagine. Every pleasure your fellow Greeks and your false gods have denied you, I will grant you. For I am kind.
This is great and all, but these chicks in here are kind of gross. Can I see the other 10?
No.
So the reason why 300 is able to take so much creative liberty with historical fact is because the whole movie is told from the perspective of Delios.
Tell them my story. Make every Greek know what happened to you. You'll have a grand tale to tell.
And that's exactly what he does, and like every good storyteller, he embellishes on the details a little bit, to make it more epic, more incredible, to forever mythologize the heroic struggle of the 300 Spartans. So it's actually rather appropriate why the Persians are portrayed to be less like men and more like monsters.
They have served the dark will of Persian kings for 500 years. Eyes as dark as night, teeth filed to fangs, soulless.
And no one is safe from 300's version of history. Even Ephialtes is demonized in a way you would expect from an ancient Greek. All we know about him is that he was a local shepherd who betrayed the Spartans by revealing a secret goat path to the Persians. So it makes sense in the movie why he looks like Sloth from the Goonies, as well as being combined with yet another unsavory character.
We're being followed.
It has followed us since Sparta.
Gollum.
He's been following us for 3 days.
Overall, I'd say that you'd have to take this version of history with a pinch of salt. It celebrates the legends of Sparta rather than historical fact, and that's absolutely fine. If a movie makes it clear right from the get-go with its visual style, its tone and plot, then I'm more than willing to accept it based on those merits. Which is why I'd say that 300 is a perfect example of creative licenses being done correctly, and based on that, why 300 is a great film. Well, that about wraps it up. My name is Nick Hodges, and thanks for watching, History Buffs. And remember, if you like the show, help the channel grow. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, and let me know in the comment section what you thought about 300. And of course, what historical movie should I review next? In the meantime, check out the History Buffs Twitter and Facebook pages for new updates. Until then, I'll see you next time.